Hello again, Internet. It's Astro with Roro here, and today is a special day because it is New Gear Day, and you know what that means. So while it is cloudy and rainy outside, it's a perfect opportunity to take this new gear, run it through its paces inside, and make sure that once the weather does clear up, I am all ready to connect and use it. So today I'm going to be doing a bit more of an informal video than normal, and I'm going to be running you through this really exciting new piece of kit. Now this may turn into a bit of a longer video, so if you're looking for specific information, make sure you check the timeline or down in the description because I will have chapters to each section. To get started, let's jump in and have a look at what this gear is. Then I'm going to show you how I set it up with all of the gear you can see around me here. Then I'll show you it working with a few different payloads, starting with some lighter gear and then going all the way up to the largest and heaviest telescopes that I have available. I will be coming back for a more detailed review of this gear once I've had time under some clear skies to test the guiding and go-to performance and all of that other good stuff. So if you're interested in more videos like that, make sure you're subscribed down below. To get started, as you will have seen from the title, we are looking at the Rainbow Astro RST-135E. Now, the Rainbow Astro RST-135 has been around for a little while now, but this is their newly updated E version, and the E stands for encoder. And that's because this does have an encoder on the RA axis, which is very exciting. So when you receive the RST-135E, it comes in these two nice little packages. The shipping was fantastic, it was all very well wrapped, and they did also come in some beautiful white little wrap bags over the top of this, but I have moved them aside for the moment. So let's get started on this one here first, and then we will jump into what's inside here. So, in this bag here, we have a whole bunch of accessories. So I'm going to take them out one by one, quickly go through them, and then we'll jump into the main event, which is this bag. First off, we have the hand controller here. This is quite a nice and ergonomic hand controller. I have used it a little bit and it does sit nicely in your hand. It has a nice weight to it, but it's not too heavy. And the buttons have a really nice tactile feel. They feel like they'll last quite a while actually. They're a little bit more rubbery and soft touch compared to the Celestron and Skywatcher buttons. And there may be some issues with the details rubbing off, but it feels like it's all made very well. And it is actually very satisfying to click these buttons. I don't know if you can hear that. It feels really nice, actually. Very satisfying. Moving on though, next we have this little Allen key here. This is a 4mm Allen key, and this is required to change the mount from its Alt-Az mode into its equatorial mode, because yes, this mount can do both, and I'll show you that in a moment. Then we have a whole bunch of cables. We have a USB 2, this is a Type B to Type A cable. This is for connecting your computer directly to the mount for that computer control. We then have, this is the hand controller cable, which has your standard sort of Ethernet looking ports. I don't know if this is a standard Ethernet cable or not, but this will connect to your hand controller, which is nice. Next up, we have a power cable. This is just a standard DC 2.1mm to 2.1mm cable, so you could replace this with any DC cable that you would like in that 2.1mm format. We then have an adapter here for connecting it to mounts, some cables to attach, some more cables. I believe this is like a weight hook which you can attach to the bottom of it, so you could hang like a sandbag or your backpack off the mount, and this would help to add some additional weight to maybe prevent against wind issues, because this mount is exceptionally light, and if you are experiencing heavy wind, you may actually want to add weight to it, which is kind of a weird thing to say. Next up, we have a little adapter here. This is for attaching a pole master or some sort of polar alignment scope to the mount. Then last of all, we have a little grub screw here, which I will get to in a little bit. I'll leave that one over here. So that's what we have in the bag here. I should mention that the remote here does actually come with a nice little leather strap on it, but I have since taken that off. One additional thing that didn't come in the bag but did come with the mount as well as an accessory is a whole bunch of cute little stickers. They're very nice, good little touch there. I like that, Rainbow Astro. Now on to the main event. So as you can see, this bag is very small, quite lightweight. I don't really know what to compare it to size-wise, but you can see here it's definitely small and compact and very easy to sort of throw into a larger bag if you so choose. There's a good zipper on it, and then opens up in this sort of clamshell method, which is okay. I kind of wish maybe it zipped a little bit further so that you could properly hinge it, but I mean, it's good enough to get in and get the main item out. So I'm just gonna pop this down here. And here we have it. This is the RST-135E. This is a harmonic drive mount, very different to a regular drive mount, which you may get from Celestron or Skywatcher or any of the other major brands. I believe at the moment there are only 3 brands that are making mounts like this, and I could be wrong. There is Crux, who have a couple. There is Rainbow Astro, who again have numerous mounts like this. And the only other one that I've seen is Planewave, who also have harmonic direct drive mounts. And you know that if Planewave are using this as some of their mounts, then it's got to be not too bad, so long as the implementation is good. So let's have a quick overview of this mount, and I'll walk you around all the different parts of it. So to start off, up the top here, there are a number of lights here showing you power, tracking, and status of the mount, so they will blink depending on what's happening. Then you have a on-off switch here, nice tactile feel there. This little round portion here is for attaching your polemaster or some polar alignment scope. Sorry, not scope, camera. You cannot use a polar alignment scope on this, you have to use a camera. Then we have an ST4 guide port for anybody out there who's still using ST4 and not using pulse guiding. Moving on to the right side, we have our DC 12 to 16 volt in, the 2.1 millimeter port here on the right hand side. This mount can take 12 to 16 volts. If you're giving it 12 volts, I believe it can slew at around 6 degrees a second. And if you're using 16 volts, I think that goes up to around 7.5 or 8 degrees a second. So this thing can move very fast, definitely fast enough to track almost any satellite or rocket or whatever you would like to be tracking, which is really cool. Then over onto the left side here, down the bottom, we have the hand controller connection, and up the top we have our USB type B connection. So all very straightforward there. Moving around here, this is where we're going to be putting our telescope mounting saddle here. It also has some little illustrations here showing you what direction you want to mount your telescope in, which is nice because this doesn't necessarily mount like a traditional mount would as well. Some screws here to attach that saddle, and then let's get on to the meat down the bottom. So you will notice that there are these wing nuts on either side here, and these are used to control the altitude adjustments of the mount. So if I unlock these, then you'll be able to see that the mount will freely move from about, horizontal, I think it's about 5 degrees above horizontal, all the way up to 90 degrees here. And yes, this mount can be used, I believe, everywhere in a latitude perspective, which is quite nice. If you're using it in your Alt-Az mode, this is how you will be using the mount. And if you're using it in the equatorial, then you would move to the appropriate latitude here, lock off those wing nuts, and then use your Allen key here. There is a little 4mm Allen key screw in the side here. Lock that down, and now you're engaged and you're able to use, if you loosen these back off, you're able to use the fine adjustment altitude knob here on the back to make those adjustments for your polar alignment, which this is a very satisfying little grub screw here. It just infinitely turns, which is quite nice. I have found it very easy to sort of do my polar alignment tests on this. Then once you're done, you can lock down those side screws there. Then finally, we have a locking mechanism here at the front. It's currently unlocked, as you can hear. You can then lock that one down there. But leaving it unlocked, if we go back around here, then you have your azimuth adjustments here. And unfortunately, it's not like a single worm like the altitude. I do wish this was just one that you could turn either way. You do have to unscrew on the one side and screw on the other. But again, I haven't really found any issues. They don't lock up. They're very easy to turn. As you can see, I really don't need much effort at all to turn these screws. So the machining on this mount is really beautiful. Everything is made out of a CNC sort of aluminum, I believe, some sort of high-grade metal. It's all sort of machined really nicely. Super solid. Everything about this mount is just amazing. There's no rattles or creaks as you turn it. Everything is just really, really nicely made. So now that we have a general overview, let's talk about attaching a saddle to the top of this, because you will need a saddle if you want to use it with a telescope. To get started, you're going to want to take off the 2 Allen screws at the top here. Now these do require a 6mm Allen key, which I have here. This isn't provided by Rainbow Astro, which is a little bit frustrating, but you should have one of those at home. Now, Rainbow Astro does have a Vixen saddle that you can purchase. This is an additional cost for the mount, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. Firstly, it only has your sort of Vixen style. It doesn't do the wider plates. And I also just am not really a fan of the saddles that just have a single pin sort of punch in. I find they often leave indentations on my dove plates, and I'm not a huge fan of it. So instead of this, I went out and purchased a third-party accessory which works. I bought this one off AliExpress. Actually came reasonably quickly. I love the red color, and it has these 2 large sort of locking plates that move in. So instead of a single screw, you have a whole plate here, which I feel much more secure with, and because you have 2 of them, that's great. It has your Vixen and your Losmandy D style widths here, so I can use it both on my smaller, more portable mounts and my larger telescopes as well, which is really lovely. They also have these little rubberized ones here, which make it really nice to sort of get a firm attachment without sort of over tightening. So definitely recommend this third-party accessory or a similar one, which you can get from lots of places online. So now attaching this is super simple. As I mentioned, there is a little image of a telescope, and it is saying that the front of the telescope should be, turn it this way, the front of the telescope should be on this side of the mount, and the back of the telescope should be down this side. So based off that, I always hold my telescopes in my right hand. If I turn this towards you, the front of the telescope would be towards you. So if I'm holding the telescope in my right hand, I want my left hand to be able to tighten this. So I would like this in this orientation. There are a bunch of holes on the top here you can use to secure it. So I'm just going to take this, place it on the top, and then align it so that I can start putting these screws in just really lightly at the moment. Make sure that they hold, and then attach the second one. There we go. So you can see the 2 screws in the middle, and then simply tighten down with the Allen key here. Now I'm just going to tighten just to when it starts getting a little bit of bite to it. There we go. Now we want to make sure this is properly centered up. About there. And then give it a bit of a tighten. Now you don't want to over tighten these because you may want to undo them at some point, but definitely want to make sure they are locked in there, which they are. There we go. That is very firm. Now, you may have remembered that I talked about this little grub screw earlier. This goes into the underside of the mount here. There is a little hole, and this is because you can, if you want, attach a counterweight bar. So I have a 3 kilo counterweight here and the associated counterweight bar. And this counterweight bar has, I believe it's an M8 screw, which would go into that at the bottom there. But this counterweight and counterweight bar are only required if you're using this mount for between 13 and 18 kilos worth of payload. Now, none of my setups have more than, I think, about 12 kilos worth of payload. And you'll see later on that, yes, this mount can indeed hold and slew around 12 kilos worth of payload absolutely fine. You may want to still use this if you're out under some wind, again, to give it a little bit more heft to resist those wind buffs. Or you may find that if your tripod isn't able to keep up with the weight distribution of your mount wholly hanging off one side, you may want to use that counterweight to bring a little bit more of the weight back on center so that you don't risk your tripod and everything falling over, because that would be horrible. But for purposes today, I will not be putting the counterweight bar on, but if you did want to, when you get it, you simply unscrew the little key here using this 4mm Allen key, screw in the counterweight bar, and the counterweight then just slides down over that bar. You can, again, there is a 4mm grub screw on the end, down this end, or you can do it from this end here, and that then just locks in using this nice little handle here. So now that we have our mount ready to attach our telescope to it, let's put it on the tripod so that we can actually go and set it all up. The first thing you'll want to do though is, if you have purchased the half pier, which I do recommend you get, you will want to set up your half pier. So first things first, your half pier will come with 3 small screws. You want to screw them into the 3 associated holes at the top. I'm just going to loosen these up. This is where the mount will be attaching to the half pier. So you'll be sliding the mount in the top of this. Next up, you'll want to use the 2 larger screws that came with the half pier, because this is going to be attaching to the bottom of the mount. And this is what's then going to be locked in to the top of the half pier here. So we're going to turn the mount over. There are 2 associated holes on the bottom here, and we are just going to begin attaching. All right, there we go. Again, this doesn't need to be super tight, even just really lightly, attached here just with some very simple force. This is more than tight enough. You really don't want to over tighten these. You could find that these lock up, especially if you're out in the cold or something like that, and it's really unnecessary. Everything is so nicely machined that the tolerances are just really just right on, and so you don't need to put a huge amount of force in to lock this down. You can see that is really screwed in well there. So once you have the mounting plate attached to the bottom here, turn it back up. You can see it's definitely quite light. Like, considering this can hold 13 kilos as is, it's honestly very impressive that I can even just pick it up and hold it in one hand. The EQ6R Pro that I've been using before this, I would really struggle to move it around like I have this. So next up, we take it like this, place it into the half pier, and then you want to use these 3 screws here to just lightly screw them down until they make contact. And then once they've all made contact, you can give them another half turn to make sure they're properly locked in there, which they are. And now, yeah, once again, absolutely no movement. So the mount and the half pier are now attached to each other. Now, the next step will depend on what tripod you have chosen to use. This mount can attach to multiple tripods. Will that sit like that? Oh, only just. In my case, I have chosen to go with a lightweight carbon fiber tripod. This is the Rainbow RST-135E. I believe this tripod comes in at around 2.5 kilos in weight, which is awesome because I'm going to be using this as a portable setup, so I really want it to be lightweight and easy to carry around. And I believe the mount is around 3.5 kilos. The additional saddle that I have is around 0.5 kilo, and then I think the pier is about another 0.5 kilo. So you're looking at about 4.5 kilos, 7 kilos in total, which is insane to think that 7 kilos can carry, essentially double or even almost triple its weight in mounting capacity. The Rainbow RST-135E tripod here is actually spec'd up to carry 40 kilos, which is more than what we're going to need here. So we now have the tripod set up. This is in its sort of middle leg range, so it does have 3 ranges of motions, which you can change by pulling out here. You can see I can lock it in very flat, or I can go and lock it in a much more vertical orientation. Now in the top you can see there is a nice hole here. That's because I have already taken out the existing mounting plate that came with this Rainbow tripod. To do that, you want to unlock this side screw on the side here, and then there is a button here that you want to push, and that will release your existing plate here. You want to make sure that this locking screw is nice and loose so that we can put the half peer straight in. So let me make sure that we're not going to lose it off the side of the table. Excellent. Actually, I'm just going to turn this around so you guys can hopefully see the locking mechanism. All right, so we then take the half peer and simply drop it in. That has now already locked into place. You can see I'm not able to lift it out. If I wanted to do that, I would have to push the locking pin here, and then it would easily be like a quick release. So once again, lock it into place there, but you can see it does actually wobble around quite a bit, and that's because we haven't tightened it down. So simply push down this tightening screw all the way down, and now really, really solid. So that is us ready to mount a telescope. I'm going to quickly change the camera angle so that you can see me mounting a telescope on the top here, and then let's run through how to quickly set up and get this mount up and running. Okay, so I have lifted the tripod up one of its leg stands. It does actually have 4 pieces of leg extensions that you can. So this is about half height here, which is pretty good for what I think you would use if you were just taking photos. You'd probably have it a little bit higher if you were using it for visual, so that you didn't have to sort of bend down quite so much, especially if you're using a Schmidt-Cassegrain or Maxitov-Cassegrain style telescope. If you're using a Newtonian style telescope for visual, this may actually be a good height because the eyepiece of the Newtonian would be somewhere around here. Of course, you can also have it lower, and I would recommend that if you were using this for photographic purposes, to have it as low to the ground as possible to really stop all that wind and shake that you would get by lifting it up. It is a carbon fiber tripod, but the more you can reduce those vibrations, the better. Now, as you can see, I have 2 telescopes here that I'll be using for demonstration purposes. At the front here, we have the Skywatcher SkyMax 150. I believe this weighs around 3.5 kilos. And it has a traditional Vixen mount. And then I have the Celestron EdgeHD 9.25 inch. So quite a large and heavy telescope. I believe this total setup is around the 10 kilo mark. So still well below the rated maximum of the RST-135, but unfortunately I just don't have something that weighs 18 kilos. If there's anybody out there that would like to send me a larger and heavier telescope, do let me know. Also, if you're looking to get a review of the Celestron 9.25 inch EdgeHD, make sure that you're subscribed, because as soon as we get some clear skies, I will be getting this bad boy out for visual and photographic purposes, including the 0.7x reducer. So to get started, we want to make sure that the mount is powered before we put anything on. So I'm going to be using my Jackery 500 here as the power supply. I just have a 2.1 millimeter DC, so make sure that's put in there. Turn on the power, and there we go, we have power. And what that means is this mount is now locked in place. It has the drives activated and electricity running through it. And you want to make sure that you do that because this mount does not have a brake built into it. And that means if you put something very heavy on this mount that is lopsided and it is not turned on, then it can do something called backdriving. Now, if you're interested in seeing what the backdriving is like, how you can stop it, and how fast your telescopes move if you're worried about it, make sure you subscribe, because I'll be releasing a follow-up video very shortly showing you what backdriving is like with large telescopes like this and my 190mm Maxitov Newtonian, as well as smaller telescopes so you can see if backdriving will even happen at all for you. So without going too much further into that, let's start attaching these telescopes to see what happens. So next step is you want to grab the hand controller and attach that. So I'm just going to undo the cable here. There we go. Plug the hand controller in on that side, on this side. And I am going to get the mount now to do a homing routine. That's essentially going to allow the mount to find out exactly where it is, and you want to do this before you attach any telescope to it so that it just knows exactly where it is. It will also align it in a very specific manner, which will help you with your balancing later on. So to do that, you simply hold the 0 button and it will align on the RA and deck axis. There we go, it has now found its home position. However, I don't really want to have to attach the telescope in this position. The knobs are on the lower side here, which would mean for me, using my left hand, I would need to stand with my back to the camera. So let me change the orientation that we're currently set at. To do that, you would hit 8 on the controller, enter to go into the parking mode, and then there is a mode called polar axis. Hit enter, enter again, and it will align itself as a traditional telescope mount would. That is the telescope pointing up towards the polar, the celestial pole, and the bottom of the telescope pointing down towards the ground. And I find it much easier to attach the telescope in this method than in this orientation compared to the other orientation. So let's quickly throw the Skywatcher SkyMax 150 on. There we go, we're fully attached. Now the beautiful thing about this mount is you actually don't need to do a full balance check like you would normally. Because it doesn't have a counterweight, you actually will not be able to balance it at all. So I just generally sort of try and look and see that it is somewhat balanced, and that's mostly so that it doesn't topple over on the mount if it's way too heavy on one side compared to the other. So now that we have it all sort of set up here, we can hit 9, which would bring us up to the planetary menu, the solar system menu. And I could say, hey, you know, let's go to Venus, which we hit enter, hit the go to, it tells us the location, and enter to confirm. And there we go, we are now pointing at Venus. Now you can see that the telescope is completely hanging off to one side, and there is no counterweight on the other side here, but there is really no issues at all. And I could easily slew this around. And it moves very quickly indeed and very accurately. So no problem at all with the SkyMax 150. I'm going to park it back into the polar axis, and then we can put on the larger telescope. Okay, now you will have noticed that I did just rotate this mount around, and that's because I noticed as I was putting the smaller telescope on that the front of the mount here wasn't directly over one of the front legs. And that meant that as I pushed the weight of the telescope into the saddle, there was nothing preventing the mount from wanting to lean a little bit. Because this whole setup is so light, you don't have that real grounding effect holding it down, and so it does move around a little bit compared to a traditional mount. So you want to make sure that as you're facing your polar alignment, that you have a leg directly under where the pole side of your telescope is. That means as you push onto the mount, it is rock steady, and you want that as you're putting the weight on there and holding the telescope to then adjust the locking screws here. So once again, I'm just going to loosen these screws off and then grab the telescope. I do like how the 9 1/4 inch has this lovely handle here. Definitely makes it a lot easier to use. All right, so there we go. Once again, just sort of generally get it to where I think it should be. And that was much more comfortable. All right, make sure it's on reasonably tight. Give it a bit of a wiggle. Perfect. Okay, so that's a rather large telescope on a very small mount. How will it cope? Well, let's go into planetary mode by pressing 9. Once again, let's try Venus, hit enter, go to. It says how long it's going to take for the mount to reach Venus. In this case, it's going to take 11 seconds to do the slew. So I really like those little touches that Rainbow Astro has put in there. So enter, and here we go. Well, wasn't that impressive? As you can see, we now have about 10 kilos hanging off this one side of the mount with absolutely no counterweight or anything on this side, and it just handled that like a champ. Let me quickly give it a little nudge and you can see the stability of this setup. Now, as you can see, as I pull it back towards me, which is the side that all the weight is on, there is definitely less stability than if I pushed it towards you. There's virtually no movement, and sort of pushing it this way here, again, there's not too much movement. So there's definitely a little bit of, like you can tell that the weight is off-centered on the telescope, and that is where you might want to add a counterweight purely for your own peace of mind if you had something like this or even larger hanging off the side. The other option, of course, is to splay the legs out wider so that you have a larger base to actually hold that center of gravity, because then it will be much more towards the center of the mount footprint, rather than at the moment it's sort of 2/3 of the way out because I have the legs splayed in quite closely. So let's do a quick slew around. Maybe let's move to something else. Let's here go to Mercury maybe instead. 18 seconds for this one. I believe it might do a meridian flip here. Let's see. And there we go. I'm going to do one more quick meridian flip here, and this time I'm going to hold the microphone close to the mount so you can see the type of sounds that it makes as it does that slew, just in case you couldn't hear it before. One thing to keep in mind is as it does the slew, notice how the sound changes depending on the weight and the way that the drive is moving. Okay, so now you know what it sounds like. I wouldn't call this a ultra quiet mount, but it's definitely quiet enough. I did have this out on the balcony late at night doing some test slews, and I wouldn't say it would annoy neighbors. It's definitely sort of on par with quietness with some other mounts that I have. It's quieter than the Celestron AVX, for example, slightly louder than the Skywatcher EQ6R Pro. So I would say it's reasonable for a mount. Okay, so next up, let me bring my laptop out and I'll show you how to do the computer connection and the software that you will need for that side of things. Okay, so I now have my laptop set up here and doing a screen recording. So you will see that somewhere up on the screen here as I walk through that. So to get started, you want to take the cable that, this white cable that comes with it, which is a USB 2 Type B. You can connect that in right here, and then the other end has a classic Type 1. Now my laptop only has USB Type C, so I have a little adapter here. I'm going to plug in and plug the mount in, nice and easy. So let's now jump onto that computer screen, which will be somewhere up here. And first things first, you're going to want to go to rainbowastro.com. Once you're there, you want to go to support, download software. And here you will find a whole bunch of downloads. So for the firmware, if you want to do a firmware update, you can download the latest firmware here. You also will want to download the firmware downloader. What you want to do is download both of these, run the firmware downloader, make sure your mount is connected, and then when you've got the firmware downloader running, you then simply choose the firmware file that you want to update, hit OK, and then leave the mount for about 15 minutes as it doesn't update. I have already updated my mount, so unfortunately I cannot show that to you. You then want to click on the USB driver download page, click on that, and it will download the driver for you. Once you have that downloaded, then you want to run the Hubbo iAscom software. Simply double click, and walk your way through the setup. Once you're set up, it's very simple. You can then run your favorite program. In this case, I'm going to be showing Nina. Let's jump down to telescope here, and you want to select Hubbo-I. You can then hit the power button here to connect, and it will load up and ask you if you want to move the information from Nina to the telescope, which is essentially you putting the details of where you're located in a latitude, longitude from Nina into the telescope, or do you want to take it from the telescope and load that into Nina? Now, this is up to you depending whether the information you have stored in the telescope is correct or the information you have stored in Nina is correct. In this case, I'm going to say, let's go from Nina to the telescope. That is all done, which is great. We can then now set our primary and secondary rates. This is of the the DEC and RA in degrees per second. You can see here it's saying it's going to move it about 6¼ degrees per second. We can also set our tracking rate to either stopped here or sidereal, whether we want to reverse our RA and DEC, park, unpark, or home. This is currently the home position. So if you want to home your mount, this is the direction it's going to look in. In this case, the front of the telescope is facing east, and this is facing south because I'm in the southern hemisphere. If you were in the northern hemisphere, then of course the equatorial face of the mount would be facing north, and your telescope would be facing west. However, if you want, instead you can park it. And I have actually set the park mode to be a polar align, which I find is very helpful. And you can just see how quickly it does move it around there. However, if you'd like to adjust the setup of the mount itself, you will notice that another window will have opened. This is the Hubbo-I ASCOM controller, and it gives you all the information about the telescope itself. You can see here, all of the information in terms of RA, DEC, Alt-Az. We have a slew controller here. These are the speeds that you can use. So max is just as fast as the telescope can move currently, or we can jump down to find, much, much slower. Then we can do a center. I honestly can't even hear that at all. It is so quiet. And then we can have our guide rates, where if you really want to be ultra precise and you just want to move it at guide speeds, then you can again move it at guide speeds. Now this is great for, when you're first slewing to an object, and then you're like, oh, went a little bit past it, let's go to the find speed, and then make your fine adjustments and then really hone it in. Love this. Up the top right here, up the top in the middle here, you can see the power and input voltage. So if I crank up one of the axes here, you can see that the declination, we're getting up around 50–55% in motor speed, and then back the other way. Now I believe this is because the amount of voltage that I'm feeding to it, I'm only feeding about 13.5 volts from my Jackery 500. So if you were feeding it maybe at a 16 volt, you may be able to get more speed out of it. Alternatively, it may also be working based off the mount, the telescope weight. If I had more weight on it, you may be seeing it at a higher motor power. I'm not sure. There we go. We can see here it's saying yes, 13.2 volts nominal coming in. Now home, it has not found the home. So if you want, once you have connected your telescope and connected your mount to your computer, do make sure that if your mount was already on, when you connect to the computer, you want to toggle it off and back on, then it will actually show up in the computer. So do make sure you toggle it once you actually connect the USB. You will then want to hit this homing button down here, and it will go through its regular homing routine. And there we go. If you wanted to set a location from a lat longitude perspective directly within here, you can hit this location button here, fill in your latitude with north-south and your longitude with east-west, then send to mount, and it will update that location. You can also click get from mount, and it will load the information already stored in the mount, which is great. You can also come down here and if you want, change the polar position. I've had a vertical flats position here that I've added in and a home position here, a home without checking. You can simply double click on these and set it to either the current or a specific altitude and azimuth number, which is great. If you have a specific direction where you want the telescope to be pointing at the end of the night, then you can set it as one of the parking positions in here. Then in Nina, you can say go to parking position number 2, and it will take you exactly there, which is exactly what I have set up here with my flats. It simply points at the wall where my flat panel is, and then I don't have to worry about it always pointing at the same spot. I know I always get it right on. It does tell you over here then the temperature of the mainboard, RA and deck motor. Not sure why they've included that. I would hope it wouldn't have any cooling issues, but I guess it is nice to see. If it's an exceptionally hot day, maybe you need to take note of that. You can then do a star sync or a star alignment, do the tracking here. So we have sidereal, sun, and lunar tracking rates, and currently tracking is off, and you can just toggle it on or off here. So that is about it for this introduction to the Rainbow Astro RST-135E. It does share most of its design principles with the regular 135, and unfortunately I won't be able to show you the benefits of the Rhineshaw encoder on the RA axis until I can get it out under some clear skies. Do know though, if you're interested in something like that, I will be releasing a detailed review of the guiding performance of this mount once I have had a bit of time under some stars. So do make sure you're subscribed if you're interested in that. I hope you have found this video interesting or at least entertaining. My name is Rowan, this is Astro with Roro, and clear skies.